Okay, so you may or may not be here because of a thumbnail that may or may not be the current one, and it may or may not be asking a very stupid question, and take heed. I will answer that question. Those of you who haven't clicked on it because of that, don't worry, it's not that important. Maybe. I'll answer the question, but first I think we'll need a little bit of context. Don't you go looking at that video length. I'm sure everyone will enjoy it.
This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away.
There is something to be said about nostalgia. Trying to relive the less stressful times in your life, a time where you had fewer responsibilities to deal with, a time where your biggest concern was getting a good grade in science class or meeting up after school with a club or some friends, to remind yourself of more comfortable times. Especially in our current world situation, escaping to a different time is almost empowering in that sense. Indulging in media that you found fascinating as a child, escaping into a fantasy, at least for a while, to return to a familiar place. But of course, it's never quite the same spark of magic that you experienced the first time you went through it. But its familiarity is comfortable, like a warm, familiar blanket. It's almost intoxicating, shrinking the scope of the world down into this small little bubble of fantasy, where there is little else but this and this alone. It's a very common thing to experience, a phenomenon that's only really become more and more pronounced as more and more children who grew up with the internet become adults. It's nice to flee somewhere you have a solid grasp on your surroundings, agency. It's familiar. Stable. But time changes everything whether people like it or not, and those things will inevitably include the media that these people love so much. Creators can change, authors can go in directions that the original consumers may not agree with, but that's simply the nature of creating something worthwhile. It could be bad, it could be good, it could be boring, but what's important is that it's different. And fans won't always necessarily like that. A lot of them would prefer if it had stayed one way forever. But that simply isn't how things ought to be. But what if new authors tried to fill that void? Fan works are the lifeblood of an online community, second only really to the actual original media itself. Fan engagement, fan creations, and especially in the case of Five Nights at Freddy's, fan games. So many fan games have been made in honor of FNAF that it's been given its own dedicated category on the popular indie game platform GameJolt. The prominence of fan games and fan media throughout the FNAF fandom is special in how it lets us trace the overall cultural state of the fandom at the time. Sensibilities, popular theories, headcanons, desired directions for the franchise to take, it can all be seen through the popular fan series, the fan comics, and especially fan games. In the beginning, we had quite a few parody games like the Five Nights at Fuckboys and One Night at Flumpty's and the original fan game that was just shooting the animatronics. During this time, most fan games were amateur recreations of the original FNAF game. There was Candies, Wario's, the fake FNAF 3 that would eventually become the Return to Freddy's, among others. But as time passed and fan creators got better at what they did, we got projects like The Joy of Creation, Pop Goes, and the like. Pretty good. Some even flat out great. But the average fan game quality would only improve with things like the Radiance team rendition of Treasure Island and its sequel Oblita's Casa, Junior's Tealerland, Mary's Arcade, Graveyard Shift at Freddy's, Animator's Hell, Animatronic Memories, and I could go on and on and on. Yet, as even more time passed, the mainline Five Nights at Freddy's series became more and more detached from its grounded haunted restaurant roots, with this theme of an urban legend coming to life. The tone established in the original trilogy was taken away and pivoted into a more science fantasy themed horror series, featuring more and more literally and figuratively colorful and fantastical characters. But the thing about that is that by pivoting so far away from the original theme, tone, and even gameplay style, people are going to be upset and wish for a return to the original style that got them into the series and what made it so big in the first place. So from there emerged the recent trend of fanworks of popular video games attempting to recreate the past through fan-made remakes. It's a very universal sentiment, especially in this current media landscape full of lazy remakes and unoriginal sequels, to want to return to a time when the creators of your favorite pieces of media were making what you wanted. The spiritual successor is nothing new, but this isn't quite like that. Here, fans are directly using the original characters of the source media to make reinterpretations and recreations. It's an incredibly justified way of going about things, using your creativity to inject new life into something so familiar. It's justified. Respectable, even. However, where it becomes less respectable is when people begin getting upset when an original creator begins creating things with a different take on the old media. It could be an evolution, or it could just be deciding to do something different because a previous saga had already ended and something new needed to be explored, lest it stagnate and become something that no one would ever really want. A zombie series. All possible avenues taken. No indication of creative life, just stale, repetitive entries created for the sake of profit only. But still, returning to that old familiar place is oh so enticing. The first instance of this split amongst specifically the FNAF fandom was at the release of FNAF World. It was the first instance of official FNAF game content that tilted itself away from horror, not only tilting, but hard turning away from it at the time when the largest mystery in the FNAF series would ever get presented to the fanbase. The fanbase was eager for answers, for clues, and instead they got this. A cutesy fun RPG that on release was not only pretty bad, but extremely buggy. From there on, the FNAF series became progressively more self-aware and non-serious, starting with the completed FNAF World, more jokes in the sister location and pizza sim games. The lore became more fantastical. They explained the ghosts through science. Books came out which followed the original urban legend theme, but that of course also changed over time, eventually dipping into wacky shit like Springtrap, Mpreg, or Phasgoo. From there, the release of Security Breach and its less than scary characters, which could only really solidify the direction that the series was going for. And from this, you can sort of see why there was a big push from a portion of the fanbase to recapture the quote-unquote scary FNAF again. Some of the largest contributors being the FNAF VHS series, contributions from other fan animators like the ever-glorious Paddington and the like. But in my opinion, the largest indicator of this popularity for the sentiment to return to a darker, more mature, grounded world came in the form of the remakes. There have been many attempts to remake FNAF over the years, but the most famous, or infamous, would have to be the cancelled FNAF Plus by Fiznom. Back when this game was first announced, it was the talk of the fandom. It was scary. It was such a fresh take on the original FNAF from what scarce information that we could gather, but this topic is a whole nother rabbit hole in its own. What's important is that its creation and subsequent cancellation was followed by many games attempting to follow up on this re-energized community of those wanting more horror in their FNAF. Phil wasn't the cause, but his game, to me at least, signaled a sort of push towards more grounded urban legend-style small-town pizzeria FNAF stories, each with their own little twists. Graveyard Shift at Freddy's, Animatronic Memories, Freddy's Reanimated, FNAF Mobile Port, Blood and Gears, and others are all just some of the more prominent examples of this fandom trend, recreating or spicing up the original moody, dark, simple, yet extremely effective Five Nights at Freddy's 1. But that's the thing, though. All of these works, all of them, are fundamentally attempting to recapture the energy, the magic, the appeal, the spark that was the original Five Nights at Freddy's. Sure, they're different here and there. Sometimes it's your office that's different. Sometimes the story is changed. Sometimes the animatronic might not even be a robot. But when you take away all of the fluff and the flavor, everything boils down to trying to recreate and recapture that lightning in a bottle moment that you can never experience again.
It has been 10 years since you first had the pleasure of experiencing our wonderful story. This story, it brings you good memories, right? But you are bored. All you've ever wanted is a fresh perspective. And I can give it to you. The sands of time shift and arrive before you. You grow older. Your vessel gradually breaks down, but our story fills you with a glimmer of sweet remembrance. Beautiful, wonderful, amazing. Nostalgia, I tell you. That stuff is like a genie in a bottle nowadays, but history will always come back around, and you can't accept that. Your warped perspective fills your brain. Memories of good times, bad times, innocent times. And so, you come crawling back. You want to be young again. Everyone does, right? You want to be young. One more time. I will give you that privilege. I will give you the gift of living through our story. But I can already hear you now. You think you could improve upon perfection. Perish the thought. But you don't know what I can do. You see, I am in control now. My influence permeates the very foundation of this wretched place. I have the potential to paint and poke and prod and mold it into your greatest fantasy. Like a painter to the canvas. Imagine that. My very own freak show, and you have front row seats. Now why don't you take a seat? And let me put you back together. One plastic
This is FNAF 1 Remake, a FNAF fan game by Marco Antonio, different from all the others. In this game, you don't play as a hapless night guard, a reporter in need of a scoop, or any important character from the lore. You are you, as you are, a person wanting to re-experience the glory days of Five Nights at Freddy's, so enamored with the series that you decide to let something in, lured in by promises of getting to experience that magic of days long past. Better yet, it promises to improve on perfection, and so you indulge yourself. You play through its game, in a pizzeria monochrome as if frozen in time, yet a sickly bluish gray, not dissimilar to mold or detritus, rotting in place. You play through its game. Everything is as it should be, yet ever so slightly different at the same time. At first, anyways. Your office doors need you to pull them down manually rather than at the push of a button. And the animatronics, oh, your old friends have definitely seen better days. They're even behaving differently than you're used to. A little something to spice things up around here. But it's standard fare so far, a simple redux of the original game. Nothing you haven't seen before. Well, and would you look at the time? You're almost done. Another night one in the bag, nothing to see here, but
just like the old times.
Right as playtime was about to end, your generous benefactor takes all of the toys and pieces and puts them right back into place. This time, with new pieces and rules added to the mix, make things more interesting again. Foxy's here, with new tricks, controlled shocks, and a hook that descends from the ceiling that you have to click away. How fun! It's not enough. Freddy is here. He'll appear inside your office. Look at him to make him leave. It's not enough. No new twists. The night gets harder. It's still not enough. You're unhappy. It was fun at first, but it got old. It always does. You're bored. You want to go. You want to leave. You're sick of this. There has to be something new, but...
It can't end this way. It can't end this way. You don't understand what I achieved here today. How difficult it was to get them all in one place. Don't you see? All of this was for you. And all you do to repay me is leave me here to rot. I won't have it. If this isn't good enough for you, then I have to make it perfect. Clearly, I am pure. If you would rather abandon what we have together, let me prove it to you. I will show you the perfect night. I will give you everything you've ever needed. I'll be the greatest celebration, the party of a lifetime, all for you. And this time, you won't ever want out. You won't ever want out.
He puts up a fight. This thing that you've invited in, it was never just another edgy, shitty EXE entity. All along, what kept you here may as well just be a part of you. That part of you that indulged and cherished your time with FNAF back in its heyday circa 2015. That part of you that obsessed over old lore, old characters, playthroughs, fan comics, fan art, fan fictions of this time long past. An old friend, a buddy, your buddy, a manifestation of the desire to remain here, in this old space, desperately trying and failing, desperately flailing to catch that same high you felt that when you were young. A futile effort that will never bear fruit. Mutated, mutilated, ripped apart, and stitched together into an unhealthy desire to recapture those heavenly, carefree days of old in vain. That's how it's always been, though. You can move the pieces around, add more rules, change how things look, how many times you want, as many times as you need, but when the cards are all down, eventually you are going to need something new, or you'll just continue to rot. You need to leave. You need something fresh.
Stop it.
You need to let this place go.
Please.
This place is hell. But here, the only thing you need to do is step away.
I failed. The one thing I was meant to do, and I failed. It's not perfect. I'm not perfect. I never will be. I've tried my best. I really did. But it wasn't enough. And now, when you close this game, I will die all over again. Licking flames of rejoice itself will scald my very soul. For I am nothing but deja marks in a grid. I never had my own mind. I only exist through yours. And as I bounce off the walls of your skull, nothing but darkness will welcome me. Roaming these empty miasmic halls for time immemorial. Please do not be cross with me. I did everything I could to please you, and I hope this last hurrah we had together was. I hope you had a good time. I hope you had a good time. I hope you had a good time. I will miss you. I will miss you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Sorry. Sorry.
This is an April Fool's game, by the way. Yeah, the developer of this game notes down that this game was made as a parody. It's a silly little game made to make fun of the recent trend of people trying to make a spooky, scary versions of the original Five Nights at Freddy's trilogy. Here, check out the creator's dog. Ooh, now they're an alien. I feel like it kind of doubles as a swan song and coffin for these kinds of games, at least for me. The developer says that you shouldn't really take this game seriously, but quite frankly, I can't help but talk about it simply because of what its message is and how damn well it conveys it. The desire to stay and stagnate in one place is one that I know very intimately. To embrace escapism. It's easy. It's routine, and sticking to routine and that comfortable familiarity is something that all people experience, but we need to overcome it lest they fester in it. I have my buddy, and I don't think I'll ever truly be rid of him. I don't think I ever really want to be rid of him. But seeing media like this, I can't help but feel seen to an extent. What a wild thing to say about a fucking April Fool's joke game, but it's true. Hey bub, these are just feelings in my chest. I can't help it. But this isn't the only stop on this little ride of ours. Others have noticed this trend as well, but they seem to hold a much more bitter perspective.
Come get you some crunchy, boy.
People have a strange fascination with wanting to consume beta content. Content from before a game's actually finished, to see the stumbles and the blunders that creators make when they were eventually ironed out for the final release of the product. Say what you will, but these actions are ultimately usually done out of love for the subject. People want to get into older development builds of video games to poke and prod, see what makes things tick. And as we've seen, that kind of thing can pull you into some pretty dark places. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a fandom that hasn't had really nearly as much fan hubbub around it compared to Five Nights at Freddy's, but it still is important to the mascot horror space in how it was one of the first of its kind right after FNAF took hold, with its development starting circa 2017. I myself have a bit of a soft spot for it, if only because I vividly remember listening to the DA Games song for it on loop for exactly 6 hours straight before I never listened to it again because I got called cringe. Although I myself never got too into it in the same way that I did with the 5-Bear, but I definitely see the appeal. The game certainly had its defenders and detractors, but what's important is that it's been a game that was a significant presence in a lot of new adults' childhoods. As such, it kind of marks it as one of the more recent new wave of nostalgic young adults thinking back on their younger carefree days by looking through the lens of their old favorite games and communities. And recently, those people found something that saw how badly they wanted to indulge in old things and make them new again. And very similarly to another, it would certainly oblige. But rather than a misguided attempt to make your daydreams happy and content, this one wants to teach you a lesson. At first glance, the Bendy 2017 prototype appears to be exactly what it says it is. The old 2017 prototype beta for the original release of Bendy and the Ink Machine Chapter 1. Bare bones, but stylized after old Max Fleischer early Disney era styled rubber ink hose animation. Very pretty if you ask me. But the first hint of something being up is surprisingly during the disclaimers. This game contains flashing lights and fast images. It may cause discomfort and trigger seizures for people with photosensitive epilepsy. But you'll play it anyway. Follow the path. We enter the game with a note. Wait, that's not right. It's wrong. Different from the final product. Different in a way that isn't your typical scary, threatening message or haunted bit of dialogue. It's just different from what was in the final release of Bendy. But if you really think about it, this game is supposedly the 2017 prototype for Bendy and the Ink Machine. It's to be expected that there is going to be some beta dialogue and beta story elements that are ultimately going to be changed for the final release as things move forward, so it's not really out of the ordinary in that sense. And so, we're met with a familiar scene, the very beginning of Chapter 1 of Bendy and the Ink Machine, but of course, this prototype has some things vastly different from the original. For one, the posters and in-game media featuring Bendy are changed, or maybe in this context it's less changed and more primitive or beta or alpha in that sense as well. Those of you who are in the creative space know that when you design a character, it's oftentimes that a character's design will go through a lot of different iterations until we get to the final product. Think about it like writing a good essay. You make your first draft, you get people you trust to read it, and they give you feedback. What's good, what's shit, what you can take in, what to change for later, and you take that feedback and you review your old text and make a second draft. Probably, hopefully making it better than the first one, and moving on so far and so forth until you've eventually reached your final product. This Bendy is odd, off from the original design. The mouth is more aligned with the over-exaggerated talking animation of the times, as opposed to the more recognizable bean mouth that we see with modern Bendy. The head is a bit strange too, with horns that stick out of a more square-looking head, as opposed to the horns of the final Bendy, whose head includes the horns in a full crescent shape. As you explore this place, you would eventually be greeted by this oddly overly animated radio. Bouncy Radio, my beloved. It's not exactly playing the greatest hits, but bless its gears, it's trying. But that's not what we're here for. Chapter 1 is all about getting things into motion, and to get there, we have to do the same fetch quest as from the original Bendy to turn on the place's main power. Collect the items, place them on the pillars, leave the room, spooky cutout, flip the switch, chase scene, prototype ends. Not very complex from what we got so far. At least that's what's supposed to happen. The game plays out how you'd expect. Walk around, get the items you need, get this over with. You're not supposed to be here. Oh well, I guess it can't be Oh. Oh no. And like that, the idea that you're really playing a Bendy prototype is shattered. Everything else so far could be excused as simply being content changed or cut by developers, but something like this is a bridge too far. The cutouts that have been chasing you throughout Chapter 1, even the final Chapter 1, were all scripted events. This is a fully dynamic and active entity chasing you. Albeit given its different expressions, it almost feels taunting? As if this thing is limiting itself, if that makes any sense. These expressions on its face, and yes, it does have many, seem more like those of someone trying to unnerve as well as mock. It watches you try to complete inane tasks from a game you've likely already completed many times over, watching, thinking, perhaps, if you're desperate enough to venture into a place like this, not to Joey Drew Studios, but back to a supposed early build of Bendy, just for another hit of secrets, some new trivia you've never seen, or maybe you're just here because you wanted to relive the past in a way. A malicious prankster, not just out of whimsy, but to cause suffering for you, the player. And that's a lot more than it's choosing to let on. Like, if it really, truly wanted to, whatever this thing is, or perhaps whatever is puppeting this thing around, it could very easily drop its mask at any time and you wanted to find something new here? Congratulations. You've succeeded. This is the real face of the 2017 prototype, but it's a lot more than just a recreation of the early Bendy builds with replaced art assets, a weeping angel, and an impossible chase thrown in. There's a story to it that isn't just,
let's rough 'em up, boys!
like Five Nights at Freddy's remake. This story is one of a perverted view of nostalgia, but in this case it's almost as if the roles have been reversed. You, the hapless, hopeless, nostalgic fan wanting to experience the old as if doing so will somehow make it new again, and this creature, Ollie, almost being disgusted by your nostalgia. He's much more antagonistic than Buddy ever was. When he catches you, system messages appear on your desktop, each containing a different message, some vaguely threatening, using your computer's name to try to get you to freak out, others expressing Ollie's own views in a more explicit manner. Idolatry is the fundamental sin.
You can't move forward if you keep looking back.
As long as there's people who refuse to move on, I'll still be here. He's disgusted by your nostalgia, despite he himself taking residence within what is supposedly an early copy of Bendy from its earlier stages of development. This is hypocrisy, or simply a part of what he is, behaving similarly to other digital entities from the past, like Red from the Godzilla NES creepypasta or Ben from Ben Drowned. It was never really made clear, other than that he holds genuine contempt for the player in some capacity. There are different details placed throughout the game that point towards Ollie's viewpoint, such as the word Anamoya written on the walls within this game level. Anamoya meaning having nostalgia for things one has not personally experienced. And really think about that for a second. It's to be noted that fans of things like Five Nights at Freddy's or Bendy and the Ink Machine tend to not be old enough to have experienced the original inspirations for the properties that they're based on. Chuck E. Cheese's, while it's still around today, typically doesn't have any more animatronic performers like it did during its heyday in the 80s. Similarly, the golden age of rubber hose animation is a long, long past. The majority of the people who were around during that era of animation are pushing into the later stages of their life, if not having already passed on. And yes, the style has been making a bit of a comeback in recent animations. It simply isn't the industry standard anymore, and it hasn't been for a long, long time. And even then, newer animation principles and techniques are often used in conjunction, making it more inspired by old rubber hose as opposed to being truly emulating it. This game seems to be putting you on the spot for idolizing and falling in love with these new properties, almost like an elitist, angry at you for not enjoying these things in the correct way. Or perhaps angry at you for enjoying them to the extent that you would seek out old builds to try and get a hit of that first playthrough or watch-through excitement. I would liken him to an old fairy tale lecturer monster. Similarly to the three ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future from A Christmas Carol, you being the proverbial tormented Scrooge. The prototype is much more targeted at the player for their presumed nostalgia, openly condemning the player in real life, as opposed to how the FNAF 1 remake handled the same general topic by creating the character of Buddy and using him as a cautionary tale for the viewer to take their own lesson from, as opposed to direct lecturing. Although this story has no definitive ending, as this prototype was in reality a sort of teaser game for a now cancelled Bendy mod / fan game by the name of Out of the Ink Machine, as created by the now defunct Lighter Side Films development team. For the purposes of this video, Out of the Ink Machine is much less relevant to the theme of perverted nostalgia in how we have been discussing it so far, aiming away from you, the individual, to provide commentary or, quote, teach a lesson to the Bendy fandom. I will not go into detail in the same way that I have with the FNAF 1 remake, but if you would like a more detailed recap, I suggest either watching a video by Dags or AltB, or maybe be a true mascot horror fan and just watch a playthrough of it on YouTube. Real ones no ball. Because Out of the Ink Machine is cancelled and will never get its Chapter 2, there is only a little bit of additional content to analyze and extract messaging from, but what is there is fascinating in its own way. Developers of Out of the Ink Machine have stated that the story of this game would have not been connected to the original 2017 Bendy prototype, but instead would have been its own quote-unquote character continuity, featuring a different intended message in its story, and a different character motive and behavior for its main antagonist character, Ollie. But by principle of its cancellation, it is impossible to truly grasp the intended plot. There's simply nothing to analyze. However, there are some distinct differences in what we have available, that being Out of the Ink Machine Chapter 1, and some assorted released concept art by artists that were once part of development. Out of the Ink Machine begins nearly identically to the 2017 prototype, although the entire studio is much more complete, if that makes sense. There's a lot more to it. The walls have new textures, there are new art assets, cutouts, all of those things unique to this version of the game. There are also new added pieces of wall messages written in ink. What's wrong? Not quite what you remember? And follow the path. A phrase that would essentially become this game's main narrative motif. The path. But let's hold off on this until later. In the sense of more differences, we have things like this game's iteration of Boris, or in this universe, Frank, a changed design that fits in a lot more with Ollie. The model for Frank is also much more, I suppose the word I would use is simple or primitive as opposed to the final Boris model from the original Bendy game, which is much more refined to reflect its, well, final state. In this way, it's made more believable that this character is a scrapped beta design that would have been patched out had this game truly been part of the original Bendy development cycle and replaced with the new final Boris design we get in the final game. There's also some real-world background behind the names of these characters, in that they're named after real Disney animators Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. It's a very cute detail, not plot relevant, but it's cute. Ironically, there are some rejected Ollie designs that I can share here that I found on the wiki. Apparently, the in-universe character of Ollie, at least the in-universe cartoon Ollie, not the monster that's haunting the game, is actually just a human in a demon onesie. I find that pretty funny, and also pretty charming in its own way. And this universe's Alice Angel, Lottie, is canonically his niece. But that's besides the point, and this video is getting long enough as is. Unlike the 2017 prototype version of the game, Out of the Ink Machine doesn't start with you immediately in danger, with either an Ollie cutout following you after you pick up your first item, or an instance of a fully manifested unavoidable Ollie running you down. Out of the Ink Machine is much more faithful to the original Bendy Chapter 1 in how most of the chapter is set up and in its execution. The chapter is largely spent stalked by the cutouts and once again finding the different collectibles to activate the ink machine, as in this version of events, Ollie is trapped within, prompting you to go through your objectives tab to let him out. It's meant to emulate the original feeling of, why am I doing this? I'm just letting the monster out that permeates the typical person's first playthrough of Bendy, a reenactment of something very familiar before someone starts throwing shit at you. But the game finally reveals its hand when you switch the ink machine on. He's out now. Only really a matter of time before you see him now. If you look at the posters that line the halls of this place, you can see that all of the instances of Ollie have vanished, no longer contained to the confines of simple things like cutouts or posters. There's only really one thing left to do now. You're chased throughout the studio, Ollie mere feet behind you, but before you can make it to the exit, you're flung into an invisible drop that wasn't there before. At the bottom of this pit, the first thing you're confronted with is Joey Drew, or at least, what's left of him. From here, you make your way out, stumbling across a satanic ritual, featuring a skeleton as depicted in the thumbnail of Insane Food Flips. Always wondered what happened to that guy. Rest in pizza, soldier. And that is the end of Out of the Ink Machine Chapter 1, and by extension, the entirety of Out of the Ink Machine. But remember how I mentioned that concept art from the dev team was released? Well, from here on out, we can start talking about it. The concept art from artist at TopHatterTop on Twitter reveals important details regarding the plot about what would have happened during Chapter 2 and beyond. The first and most important would have been the reveal that the form Ollie had been taking for the entirety of the game was not his true form. Here in this drawing, we have a part of the process of Ollie shedding his Bendy persona, revealing his true nature. No longer covered in ink, Ollie's true body is an amalgamation made of paper sheets, covered in depictions of damned souls, his eyelids peeled back from his eyeballs as his limbs begin to elongate. This transformation would have continued, his body draining of its inky facade, legs merging into a slug-like tail revealing his true form. A parasite, a slug, a worm. This parasite emptied out this copy of Bendy in the ink machine completely and utterly. No Bendy, no Sammy, all of the relevant characters were killed off and replaced, body snatched. Chapter 2 of Out of the Ink Machine would have featured the basic enemies of Bendy in the form of the Seekers as opposed to the original Searchers. The plan was that we would have been able to briefly see Ollie's true form for a split second while it threatens a Seeker to play its part. And, well, what part would that be? The part of Sammy Lawrence, the Bendy cultist from the original game. Killed and replaced by a common mob, forced into a different role, playing to the tune of an unfamiliar script.
Put your mask back on. Know your place.
The only thing alive in this game is Ollie. It's just you and him, and he wants you to
follow the path.
The reason why reveals itself once again within the released concept art. Some of the things that I am about to say are educated guesses based on context clues provided in the concept art. Don't necessarily take it as fact, but it's as close as we're ever likely to get to the full picture. Ollie has been stated to be some sort of entity that attaches itself to pieces of media that are of sufficient nostalgic value. In this case, it's Bendy and the Ink Machine. Entity we know as Ollie sets up a play, so to speak, and sets up a path for hapless players to follow. The reasons for why would remain unknown for the most part during the early chapters. Ollie wants the player to follow the same general path that was imposed on the player in the original story of Bendy and the Ink Machine, recreated mostly accurately, although very clearly and obviously incorrect in many aspects. But this game is very obviously not as it once was, and there are clear cracks in the mask, so to speak, such as Sammy's character having to be played by a common mob putting on its best Sammy impression. Those flaws would be how the player would get their one-up on Ollie. The art shows that Ollie gets frustrated, incredibly so, when the player plays like any good theorist or completionist should, exploring every nook and cranny for secrets. Secrets that aren't there because they're not intended to be. What you will find instead are incomplete parts of the play, the backstage, where the audience is never meant to be. The first time you do this, Ollie will take it as an honest mistake.
Whoops, looks like you stumbled upon something you shouldn't be seeing yet. That's okay. You were just curious. Make sure you follow the path next time.
However, continued violations will have Ollie become more and more overtly hostile in a way that his performance within the context of his rendition of Bendy isn't. It's not acting anymore. He's starting to get genuinely angry with you, and he would have set up a warning telling you to get back in line.
I've worked too long to let you ruin my story. Take this as a warning.
But of course, the player would not cooperate, likely time and again ruining Ollie's play. Things would begin going more and more off script, as Ollie loses more and more of his composure, and would eventually escalate until Ollie finally loses his temper and enters his true form. He would tear at his face, screeching. And from what would follow, I suspect, would be a boss fight, complete with a full villain monologue from Ollie, this parasite of nostalgia, likely feeding off of you and your feelings for nostalgia for Bendy. But you've chosen not to indulge him, not to continue playing your part, not to continue following his path, and that makes him so angry.
Why must you ruin everything? You people are pathetic. I give you something new to experience, yet all you do is ruin it. Trying to dissect it piece by piece in search of any ounce of secrets you can possibly find. Why can't you just play along for once?
From here, we can see exactly why Ollie's been putting on this play. This act, this ploy, not just to feed off of you, but to totally and utterly consume you, like a leech having sucked an animal completely dry of blood. Ollie would have sought to drain you dry, as it played into your nostalgia, your desire to return to simpler times. It's the worst possible heaven. We learn the truth of the pages adorning its body. Those, I believe, are the souls of its previous hapless victims, their faces added to its worm-like form, another page to help this monster grow stronger. Your memories, your past happiness is nothing but nutritious succor for this evil. And that is the extent of what we have available in terms of concept art and, by extension, official Out of the Ink Machine content. Presumably, the player would somehow be able to overcome Ollie and once again be released into the real world. Perhaps they're dropped back into the normal version of Bendy and the Ink Machine, free of Ollie's influence, or perhaps the game just deletes itself. It's impossible to know, given this work will never truly come to fruition, but it is fun to speculate and ruminate on what could have been. With my little fanfiction of what could have possibly been with the plot of Out of the Ink Machine, I think it would have been a bit much to once again analyze and go point by point through the work. In and of itself, the theming and point is very much self-evident. Much like the story of Buddy, this game condemns overindulgence and proverbial rot due to remaining in a comfortable nostalgic space, although in this series of events, instead of an entity desperate to appease your nostalgic desires, you are faced with something of much more malicious intention. Seeking to appease you in much the same way Buddy did, but committing with the full knowledge that doing so is not healthy for you. More than that, it's counting on it, waiting for you to be soft and impotent, stupid and content, rotted and stagnated before it comes to truly consume you in your entirety. It's a metaphorical thing, but of course, just like before, you would have overcome. You would throw it off, get a grip, pull away from that abyss of stagnation, and come away alive and victorious. You know, in spite of the stories that we've been telling here today, nostalgia in and of itself is not a bad thing, at least in moderation, as with all things. The stories seem to fit more into the context of being cautionary tales, displaying metaphorical depictions of the consequences of overindulgence, of the temptations and the horrid results. Like all forms of overindulgence, however, the only true solution is to simply stop partaking. Not in the sense that you should stop watching FNAF media or playing any games or watching old videos that you grew up with, but these stories are warning against the idea that you do not need to expand your horizons farther. That idea that everything you would ever need is right here in this comfortable little bubble. But that's not true, is it? People are dynamic. People need change. Stagnation isn't healthy, and putting yourself into a box like this isn't doing you any favors. For the longest time, I've found myself in this exact same spot, revisiting and rewatching and replaying old familiar games and shows, movies, comics, all these same few things that I was oh so in love with when I was young. I stagnated, for a time at least. I see myself as getting better now, expanding my horizons not just in terms of what media I consume, but the actions I find myself partaking in real life on a daily basis. This YouTube channel, for one, I made it on a whim to try to make videos about things that I found interesting, and look at it now. Look at you. Look at us. It's, of course, been a while since I started this, but I've enjoyed it enough to stick with it, and I was able to discover all these things I wouldn't have found or explored as deeply as I have otherwise. I would have never gotten out of my shell nearly as much as I have, although I definitely still have a long way to go. That, and I've met people, friends I never would have met if I'd never made this life choice. I guess what I'm getting at is that while being wrapped up in comfortable familiarity it's definitely a nice feeling, it's ultimately change that you need in your life. Sometimes for the better, others for the worst, but as cliche as it is, I'd say take a chance. 'Cause you might just like how things turn out. I just wanted to thank everybody for staying around this long, and I'd especially like to thank my patrons, past, present, and possibly future, maybe. Bats Eyelashes, Bats Eyelashes. First off, we have pinkuro.ao1233, Percert, Azir Z, and Brian Lex Brine. I very, very, very much appreciate all of your contributions and help.
All our time had its happy end. I'm forgetting you. Don't forget the silly way we met. Don't forget the tender touch that I'm forgetting you. April's here.
Yo, mama!
Oh shit, right, the question. Buddy gives better head. In my heart of hearts, I know Ollie is probably better at doing it, but he hates you and would most likely bite. And Buddy's probably really bad at it, but he'll do his best, and that's the important part. Okay, bye for real.